Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Weuve. Welcome to Connections Online. This is the panel on using AI in war games. We have an interesting group of people here today. We have, thank you very much, Merle. So we've got Merle Robinson behind the scenes producing the show. We've got me. I'm the founder of Connections Online. Eleanor Ross from Valen Games. Aaron Frank, who is, I'm just reading them across the screen as I see them. Aaron Frank, who works at the RAND Corporation. Ezra Sidran, who, well, he can tell you all the different things he's done. He's currently an independent scholar, but he's worked everywhere for everybody at one point or another. And Paul Vebber, formerly of the United States Navy, who is semi-retired at this point. So with that in mind, what we're going to do today is we're each going to take 10 or 15 minutes to sort of outline our views on using AI in war games. And then after we're done with that, we'll have a discussion about it. Please, if you've got questions, put them in YouTube in the chat section and we'll bring them up. So here's the description for today's panel. Like with all fields of human endeavor, it has been claimed that AI will revolutionize professional wargaming. To many wargaming professionals, though, the claim seems based on fundamental misunderstanding of what wargaming is. This panel aims to explore the issues associated with using AI to create, execute, and analyze professional wargames. So with that as the scene setter, Eleanor, take it away.
Awesome. Hey, y'all. It's nice to meet you guys. My name is Eleanor Ross. I'm the creative director at Valen Games, where we have a platform where you can create a war game in 6 minutes or less. It's really awesome, and I'm excited to chat about it. And today, my title of my presentation is Digital Horizons, How AI is Changing the Game, literally. And if you could go to the next slide, I'd appreciate that. So before I kind of get on in, I want to frame what we do. So at Valen Games, we create what we call immersive exercises. So these, generally speaking, are not kinetic games. They're more non-kinetic. Their focus has to do with what happens prior to war and the setup to war. We've also worked with companies and other organizations. We just ran a game at the Stimson Center, Johns Hopkins University, working with National Defense University, some with RAND, and a few other organizations and corporations. And so our games just look different. We have our games. If you look in the back of this photo, this is a photo of a class that I helped run at Duke University, which I was a student of first, and that was my entrance into wargaming. And then I came back last year and I actually ran the course. And so it was a 6-week long semester. And in the back, you can see a tweet. And so our games are live environments. They're constantly updating, and we're able to do that with the use of AI. So we have interactive newsfeed, tweets, TikToks, photos, videos, articles, characters that are real. And it's a world that lives and breathes. And all of this is possible now because of AI. What I'll get into is how everyone here knows war games take so long to build. And the concept is important, and the execution is important as well. But the execution was super tedious. And with AI and with the platform that we have, you can cut this tediousness down by 70-80% once you have the basis of your idea. Another thing we also believe is that games should be interesting or fun, and so we make them that way. If you could go to the next slide, please. So the problem I see is that games are currently super inaccessible and very time-consuming to create, and even more so to adapt. I think we suffer, the wargaming community suffers with a credibility problem sometimes because people aren't engaging with them enough. And there are some studies, but there are not a ton of studies that prove their usefulness. And I think one of the reasons of that is because there's not a democratized access to the actual, thank you, I would love some questions, yeah. There's not democratized access to wargaming. And so one of the things that we believe, and I believe, is that LLMs are the great equalizer in wargaming. With simple games, it makes it easy to create. When you have a more complex game, you can make it more immersive and epic than ever before. Our games are designed to be fun. And when you build a world that's more complex, and it takes less time to do so. So instead of taking, weeks or months to build a game, once you have the idea, you can build it in a week or 2 weeks. Or we've turned a game around in a day and up to 3 days. So we ran a game recently at the Stimson Center based on strategic corruption. This was a game for like a seminar, not a seminar, a workshop they were having with like private stakeholders, public stakeholders, government, people from different countries. And we turned this game around and came and ran it within 3 days. This is complete with team packets, private intelligence, like an entire spy situation that was going on, and a fully built out world with multiple characters. The only reason we were able to turn that around while doing all of our other work was because of AI. And so people, are often scared about using LLMs or AI in our field, and they have good reason to be. When you don't have thought behind what you're creating, the bias is towards fear. But that's not what good wargamers do. So I see LLMs as an aid to help what we're doing here and creating a world that's more rich. And when like someone says, "Oh, well, we're going to try to buy Greenland," which is something that happened in one of our games prior to the current administration, and we had no materials prepared for that. We were able to develop materials on the spot for a game we ran at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and then push them out within 15 minutes, including a full memo, tweets, newsfeed articles, and that makes it real. These takeaways people have are more because the game isn't directly branched. These matrix style games that we run, they're more open-ended. People are given more freedom to explore. If you could go to the next slide. Yeah. And like I was saying, LLMs are your creative co-pilot. So what I want to chat about here is what actually I do mostly. So I'm a game designer. I'm the creative director at Balance Games, but we have a platform that asks questions to participants, users about how to create a game. We ask like, what's the backdrop you want? Where do you want it set? And it designs a game the way like you, me, Paul, as any of us would. An experienced wargamer would design, and it builds the bones of it. I think like that's what LLMs are good for. They're building solid, strong bones that you, with your knowledge and capabilities, can adapt and improve more. Like it says here, you can focus on, the bigger picture, that character development, the storylines, and LLMs handle, the time-consuming things. I also think AI is a good way to brainstorm. Like log on to ChatGPT, think about new ideas. We need to be thinking more innovatively and more creatively as we continue on with the 21st century. Things change super fast. Like who would have expected that we go back to, China and the US is thinking of banning TikTok, and a whole flux of Americans go, okay, let's join the Chinese version. My dad downloaded that. My dad downloaded the Chinese version of TikTok and started using it. And so we wouldn't have expected that. But because of LLMs, you can create a game and run a game with something like that much quicker than you could do previously. You could go to the next slide. Yeah. And, this just continues in the idea that games are thinking labs. All these photos you're seeing throughout, the presentation I'm giving are game photos from games that we've run. I found that to bring those bigger insights out, things need to feel real. You need to suspend reality. And when your information is more sparse, or when people push at you and you can't push back, the reality is not as suspended. The insights are not as strong. By using LLMs, you're able to create information environments that are much deeper, much stronger. And because of that, the insights are bigger. LLMs also, on another hand, make games replayable. With our platform, you can clone an existing game and replay it and go through it, or like branch off in a different section. And this is, again, I'm not trying to sell anything here, to be clear, but like that's the power of LLMs. You're able to stop here and say, maybe I shouldn't have attempted to bomb China or something, which is something one of our students tried to do in a game. We said no. But like we should go down a different path. And you're able to just step back and work there and then take this analysis. So you can iterate much faster on what you're creating and what you're doing. And next slide, please. Yeah, that's generally speaking it. My takeaway is that LLMs are the way of game design in the future. You need strong POVs. You need like good analysis and good ideas behind. But LLMs are there to pump you up and allow you to execute faster. And if I can leave you with like one final thought, is that game design previously has been inaccessible. Wargaming has only been available for people, for like the military, for organizations with a lot of money. I went to Duke University. My university has a lot of money. That's why I was able to have this experience. And or companies with a lot of money. What LLMs do, like what I'm trying to do, is make it so this method of learning, this analytical tool, which is what games are, is able to be used in so many more different settings. And that's what I think LLMs can do. And I'm so happy to be on this panel to be able to contribute to that and to push that idea out there. So thank you guys so much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions now or at the end. Okay, so the first question says, this is a fantastic idea. I think as an experienced designer, I believe you are, I think of AI in the context of adding to current designs. This implies games built around the AI. Yeah, I was gonna ask you to bring that up. Could you keep the question up by chance?
Yeah, that was me, and I started thinking about this early on, and I realized that I had fallen into the old trap of using the new technology to do the old thing, and to think of it in those terms. I had never really asked myself the question, what does a war game look like if the war game is the AI,
Yeah,
it
and
is the LLM?
yeah, so what we're working on right now, and what I'm working on is developing a platform where there's like you can facilitate, you can say like in a game we're running. We just ran at Johns Hopkins University. It's like a nuclear game. It has to do um, with like Arctic melting. It's a military advancements game. But moves came in directly on the platform we have. I'm able as a facilitator to say, okay, like use advanced features of Providence, which is the platform that aren't available publicly yet, and say, okay, like the cryptocurrency, the move that they made is not working. The cryptocurrency tanks and the platform produces materials that say that and they're pushed out for the next turn. So the next newsfeed article says cryptocurrency is tanked. It's now 30 cents a coin or something like that. Or alternatively, what we're working towards and we'll hopefully have out in the near to medium term is the AI can do that all by yourself. And so what that does is it makes it so, wargaming can be individual or it can be on a group setting, and there doesn't need to be a facilitator. There doesn't need to be like a D&D player, grandmaster, whatever on the background moving everything. The AI can do that.
Okay. I'm sure we'll come back to go ahead. There's another one from that Merle put in.
Awesome. So is the delivery of info to players by electronics? What play aids or kinesthetic elements are you adding? So yes, I'm happy to, if you go on my LinkedIn or Balance Games LinkedIn, you can see like physical examples of what our games look like. But we deliver game materials in two ways, and that's how I do it. You either go and you present it. So what we did at Johns Hopkins and Stimson Center is we present physical materials. So these are like PowerPoints that are very visual. They have the news articles on them, they have the tweets on them, and then all these materials are delivered to players using the Providence platform, so like the platform we have. And then our play aids are you can submit moves in the same location. I know like a lot of people, I'm working with Fight Club right now to use the platform as a new way Fight Club's like a wargaming community for people who are unaware. I'm working with Fight Club right now to try to use the platform as a way to just communicate between wargamers. Because right now, like if you're trying to submit moves, you have to use Discord or Google or Slack or the bane of my existence, which is Microsoft Teams. Um, and like the plan is like you can do all of that within the platform, and that's already available. You can submit moves, you can adjudicate, you can push out new information, and you can message. And you can just, if you have a subscription, you can just add someone, and then like it comes in, and so they're able to get all the information within the platform much easier and make it accessible. So like not only is it AI adjudication, but it's also all within the one same space.
Okay, that's fantastic.
I'd be happy to chat, like I'll put my Eleanor Ross is my name. You happy to DM me. I'm happy to chat about like the size of our team and like what we're working on and other products we have like offline. I'm happy to answer more like AI related questions here because I want to make sure I'm hitting the topic and able to answer any of those. I don't want this is not like an ad for my company. I want to just chat about, I want to chat about the advances AI can do and how it can help the world and like democratize access to gaming, because that's how I got involved. Like I said, I was a student first and I was going down a national security route, which I still do, but more like government, nonprofit sector. And then I met Wargames and I said, I have never learned this well. I want other people to learn this well. And that's how I got involved in it, because I really think with the invention of AI, we can democratize that access. And so the feeling I got can be applied on a much broader scale.
Okay, I look forward to continuing this conversation, but right now we're going to go to Aaron Frank.
Awesome.
Aaron, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
I'm Aaron Frank. I'm a senior information scientist at the RAND Corporation. I work on predominantly matters of sort of complex systems and social science and social simulation. I had a background in gaming. I still stay involved in gaming. And I sort of work at this interface of sort of computing and decision making and research and how all these can be sort of tied together. I think the punchline for my sort of talk following Eleanor is I'll present sort of some work that we did that was kind of skeptical, that was sort of happened all before November 2022. And I think it's a sort of key date to keep in mind. And then sort of what kind of comes next. And I think that sort of moving towards what was sort of a very skeptical position towards where I think what you just heard from Eleanor. So real briefly, my thoughts are really drawing on sort of two key pieces of work here. One was for DARPA. We did a large book on undergoverned spaces and adaptive engagement, how to be more adaptive. And in there, we had a chapter on sort of thinking about agent-based modeling and sort of how do we do more complex games, putting decision makers in much more sort of strategically complex, open-ended, high-dimensional, adaptive social systems, and ultimately getting sort of to how do we think about like artificial societies as the game board. And that was sort of one kind of key piece here. I think, Chris, what you just said, where the AI is the game, is really something that we were sort of thinking about moving towards. And again, this is before the, sort of the rollout of large language models, which I think has some big implications for even this idea. The other kind of key piece that I'll really refer back to here was a study we did for the Air Force on sort of what are the limitations of using AI in war games. And again, this was research that we completed before November 2022, though was not published until, long afterwards. For those familiar with RAND, we can have a rather lengthy timeline between the completion of a project and its publication. And this is one where, kind of something important happened in between. So the kind of the key takeaway when we were looking at the limits of AI in games is we talked about, well, gee, right? Like, I think you can look at this slide and without getting into the details, just notice there's not a lot of green on here. We really saw a lot of barriers to sort of bringing AI into gaming, and I think that this was sort of some key challenges that we saw, and and so what I want to talk about was sort of you'll notice if you go from the bottom up, the bottom being sort of very much like games for training and evaluation, a lot more feasibility of sort of bringing AI because you're doing things repeatedly. You have sort of large data sets that you can train against and you can configure, and you know what evaluation criteria are and so on. But as you move up to the top, you're getting into much more exploratory games, more for research. That became a lot sort of tougher to figure out in these sort of open-ended systems what we're trying to do. And really the key takeaway behind all of this is that so much of the value of gaming in these sort of open-ended systems and explorations was that it was getting at the mental ideas in people's heads, and they're talking. Right? They're pointing, they're talking, they're interacting, and it's that interactive processes that really drives the value of these games. And what we really saw was the more you were model reliant in terms of formal models and quantitative, the more opportunities you had. But those kind of tools tended to have less and less value as the models, as the games became more open-ended, longer term, persistent, etc. So that was really kind of a big piece of why we saw so many limits. And then, right, this thing happened. And so now the question, I think, is where are we now and where are we going? So I'm going to offer some thoughts from sort of some of the experiences that I have about sort of what I think has changed and maybe what hasn't changed. Let's see if it goes. All right. So I think that if we continue to sort of think about games the way we do them and look at AI as like, how do I substitute and sort of do task replacement, we're probably overvaluing certain things that it can do because the way we do things generally is not necessarily amenable to really taking full advantage of this. One big barrier remains sort of HCI and sort of bringing computation into the spaces that we game. Again, language being a big barrier here, and as long as you're in sort of environments that give you access to a computer, right, LLMs are a very obvious, right, advantage here. But there are other kind of key features of AI and even, LLMs in particular that do have some other sort of normative context. And we've done some experiments in other aspects of work using them and sort of getting some good results and getting some bad results that I'll sort of talk about. But what I think we're ultimately getting to is there's a new framework that's got to come about. And I think that this is going to really move boundaries around as we think about what is a game and how does gaming sort of fit in the broader sort of cycles of research as we think about building the kind of knowledge we for strategic theory and development. So just sort of broadly high level, thinking about contributions to sort of the steps of gaming. If we sort of look at it as, we do preparation, we do play, we do adjudication, we do sort of post-game analysis, there's potential applications for all of these pieces. At the preparation side, it really is kind of almost a relatively simple dividing line, and that is between so much about the issues are really learned in this preparation stage. And if you treat it as a race to get to sort of the game faster without the sort of deeper look into sort of the issues, you may be missing all the sort of key pieces that really help the team learn. Once you separate out sort of the key ideas of the game from the need to produce all of those materials, the production side, you have so many opportunities and advantages to bring to bear. So if you're really a very experienced game designer, these things can really sort of, we think, sort of supercharge things. But if you're not, I think that, there's sort of some real challenges here. And I think, again, like this may be an area where, what Eleanor said and where I'm thinking may not agree, and they might, on some aspects. In terms of like gameplay, we've, kind of looked at certain things and sort of using, and I'll predominantly focus on LLMs because they are the new thing. There's some really interesting things like, asking an LLM to take actions for you, does it properly interpret them or do things in a way, or even inserting LLMs sort of into the gameplay process of things like model manipulation. We found things like using LLMs as an interface with simulations or as part of the simulation itself. And I mean this in the computing sense. If you say, choose a value from this list, it may choose a value from a different list. And so you actually end up with bugs and crashes and various things. You have to really begin to work through in fine-grained detail how to insert them into sort of workflows and sort of build some checks and robustness around them. I think we're learning how to do that. So, these may be sort of challenges that we get better at. Again, I think on the adjudication side, there's some really good things that they can do in terms of helping think through things that were unanticipated that happen. And so, but there are also sort of ways in which how you want to represent the world and how that aligns with how the models represent the world or represent actors in the world that can be sort of difficult. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then sort of, again, like analysis, we found that there can be really good for certain things. Other things about it, they've been good at sort of coming up with key themes that were discussed in a conversation. They have not been as reliable at doing things like trying to sort of code data or take an unstructured conversation and say, would the speaker agree with a set of statements if you want to move towards something that's true or false and begin to do more quantitative analysis from coding of that data. We had some efforts of trying to, code interviews or do other things like that had been disappointing. But again, what happened a year ago versus where we are now, these tools are evolving very fast. And so there still is challenges here, but sort of watch the research. I would say try and replicate the research. We learned a lot by trying to replicate what's in archive papers or other things because the field's moving faster than kind of other things. I think broadly, the best outcome is that we can create more signals in interactions and the humans really learn a lot from the gaming. I want to quote, really credit my colleague, Yuna Wong, who made probably the best statement ever about kind of AI in games. And she said, her biggest fear was that computers would do all the learning and the humans would do none of it. I thought that was a fantastic statement. I would add to that it's also possible that if we're not disciplined or really thoughtful in how we use these tools, we may just create a lot of noise and get nothing out of it. And so I'm very, I urge some level of caution here, but I also, again, want to emphasize we really should be in an exploratory phase of trying to do a lot with these things. Just really, I think, be critical or self-critical in what we really get from it. But really the goal, I think, comes back to, as humans, we are really trying to learn from these experiences, and that should remain sort of a key piece here. So what is sort of the idea, one of the issues with sort of bringing AI into games is we have stuff on tabletops with pieces and physically moving stuff. How do you get that into, these other sort of fanciful environments where everything is digital and manipulative and so on? And we think about, well, boy, wouldn't it be fantastic if we, are great, the humans do the human stuff and the AI does the machine stuff, and it's a fantastic relationship and sort of, we really benefit. But this is very sort of misleading as to what actually has to occur. And just to sort of, break this down a little bit more, this is really what it starts to look like, is you have, you get a human signal that the machine has to find and read and bring it in. And, that's speech and affect, that's scene understanding, it's physical, gestures and body language, eye tracking, attention, what kind of stress are people under? Are they cognitively overwhelmed? There's a whole lot that kind of goes on that you're trying to ultimately, if you're trying to really study and get informed as to sort of decision-making and the kind of stresses and things, that all has to get into a machine somehow, where it can be processed. Then it's got to come back out of that machine in a way that humans can actually make sense of it. It could be projected, it could be new scenes, imagery, graphs, text, whatever it is. But those pieces that really are that sort of, sort of the blue is really what we felt are sort of the boundary conditions of where you can bring AI, in productively versus where it is that just getting the HCI issues resolved remains sort of an important challenge here. And again, it's very different, right? Unclassified environment, everybody has phones and laptops versus in a classified, environment in a skip or something of the sort. But I think that this is really a key issue, is that I think the sort of AI and gaming research agenda probably needs to take serious consideration of HCI issues as part of this to ultimately move things and get kind of a cohesive environment. So, now I'll sort of just talk a little bit more about the context of the tools. A lot of work on large language models and sort of, the create artificial societies and how do they interact. And we've tried to do some work here. And we had some mixed results here, which I'll just sort of speak to about in 1 second. So, one of the things that we've done is for work for DHS, we made like an artificial high school class. And, and LLMs were fantastic at creating profiles of students, and we could sort of have them interact and talk to each other. We were really looking for can they, like recruitment and radicalization. And we were very interested in just sort of some basic ideas. We've also done work with DARPA where we've used LLMs to sort of represent humans from, small pockets in sort of, foreign countries, and ask them to answer questions about potential scenarios and why they might happen or not happen. It turns out with sort of some really good sort of prompting strategies, and we validated this by, we were actually testing an evaluation team for a program. We had real surveys being done on the ground answering these questions. And if we took LLMs as like a baseline, they performed really well against teams trying to build very sophisticated models of like local cognition and sort of local models. So I think that LLMs, in terms of their ability to like represent other actors, are actually kind of going, in a really good direction. But it's not always great. One of the things that we found is that, right, again, the real world is complex and messy. LLMs, especially if you take them kind of off the shelf, they've been built to sort of be aligned for safety and values, right? They talk about human values or other types of things. I'm not entirely sure why we believe these to be universal, but they often represent people as they want them to be, not as they are. And what happens is when we put sort of contested environments and ask the LLMs to resolve or interact, they end up with this like social oatmeal, my friend called it, sort of undifferentiated, bland, no contestation, no conflict, because sort of the models just sort of move towards it. When we start using sort of jailbroken models and models that have no sort of alignment, you'll get some really nasty things said, and people will be encouraged to support violence or hate or other things. But as we think about the kind of problems that we work on, that's actually what we need. We actually really want models that resemble people as they are, not as they're desired. So sort of be very careful in terms of how you grab LLMs, or which ones you grab, or how they're prompted, et cetera. And so kind of a key thing here is to sort of getting kind of under the hood. Another issue is sort of the engine versus camera problem. And this is sort of when models and decision making kind of come together. We think about models as cameras, right? They take a snapshot of the world, they tell us as it is. But in fact, when we connect them to our choices, they become engines. They start driving what we do. We think that, well, the model says this, therefore I should do this. And we start acting in ways that make the models true. And so one of the questions with sort of LLMs in particular is, are these engines, are these cameras? How should we be using them? What should we take seriously? What should we not? How do we sort of conceive them? So the simple thing is just to kind of go and look. And I think about, again, like exploration versus exploitation, sort of searching of sort of possibility spaces and so on. LLMs are doing interpolation, this giant space, and they are fantastic at seeing more of the space and recombining it in ways that we can, no human's ever going to get through the whole thing. But it is the world that's in the data that they were given. They are cameras. and to use them as engines is to ask them to look beyond the data they have. They're not really capable of that. We often can't tell the difference because the space that they search is so big. But we should be very careful about that and think again about what it is that we're asking models to do. So I'll just sort of go back to, I think we're on the cusp of really trying to build a new framework. The goal, I think, remains sort of developing strategic literacy, helping people really cope with high levels of complexity at sort of cognitive, organizational, operational levels. The more we can stress that, the more we can put our decision makers through more realistic and challenging environments. I think that really, to me, is really a good goal. I think that, this starts to think about, right, how do we sort of think about kind of AI in these ways, right? They're sort of discovering the circumstances that really command people's attention and effort, using sort of games and complexity. But I think that really it's if we think about sort of the research process, it's actually not just sort of AI and games, it's AI and gaming together. Where do we want to put the human attention on what parts of the problem to focus on? And how do we sort of discover in this sort of broader research piece? So lastly, I'll just sort of close with, I think that we're kind of moving towards what I hope is like a new strategic research paradigm. Kind of goes back to ideas about campaigns of learning or sort of model going back and forth. There's lots of sort of components here, right? Our games, our data collection, using case studies and experiments, using modeling simulation. And really, how do we use all of these collectively to get at the heart of building our understanding of these increasingly complex and I think global and highly interdependent problems. And so I'm actually was started out very skeptical. I'm moving towards being more and more excited about the opportunities, but I do think that it's going to require not thinking about kind of a one-to-one, let's do task replacement, and more so we need new designs. We need new designs for the games, but also we need new broader designs that put games into other contexts so that we can also think about AI's transforming data analysis, AI's transforming other things. How do all of those collectively create a new analytic ecosystem that we should be thinking about? And with that there, I will stop.
That was a fantastic presentation, and I'm still sitting here trying to process it all. I don't think we actually have any questions from that. And it's certainly not because I don't have any questions. It's because I'm still trying to figure out how to articulate what questions I have. I am beginning to think that maybe my strategy of being the last speaker was not the best one in the world, because I think by the time we get to me, everybody's going to have heard all the smart stuff, and you're just going to hear the stuff I have to say at the end. So, but we'll come back to all this because we're going to have a conversation afterwards. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and go to Dr. Sidran. And so let's see, you are muted, sir. Actually, let's see if I can, there we go.
Yeah, I thought that was at your end. So let me go back to full screen. So I'm going to tell a story, and I think it's okay for me to tell the story. And if people in black show up and haul me out before I finish the story, then I guess it wasn't time to tell the story. This story takes in the 1990s, last century. And I'm not going to name anybody that was involved.
Maybe they really did not want him to tell the story, you know?
Apparently, they don't want him to tell the story. Dr. Sidran, if you can hear us, we can't hear you. Okay, apparently they didn't want him to tell the story. All right, I tell you what, I think the next thing we'll do is we'll assume that he's troubleshooting whatever problem he's having, and we'll go ahead to Paul. Paul, are you available?
I am.
We lost him anyway, so I think he lost his network connection. All right, Paul, go ahead.
Usually that only happens to me on wonderful Aquidneck Island here in Rhode Island. So I'm not representing any organization anymore. I will put my LinkedIn thing in the chat and people can look me up if they want. I will also put a link to my slides, which are here.
Hey, Paul.
Yep.
Put them in the private chat and I will post them because we have to do it through StreamYard because Brant has a setting that prevents people from just putting stuff in. So
okay. Well, they're in the private chat now. Whoop.
All right, back to you.
Okay. So yeah, as Chris said, you know, a lot of the smart stuff has already been said. I will add in a few of my tidbits, and I've got lots of words to help me remember, but mostly so people who weren't here can go back and see things. One of the things I'm going to focus on is I'm going to look at analytic games more than narrative games. Oh, Dr. Sidran's back. Do we want?
Apparently, it's too soon for me to tell this story because they cut my internet connection.
Okay, so who would like to go next?
Well, I'll just finish up this story. It's a quick one. So,
okay.
There's a war game that's being developed, and it frankly has to. This is in the 1990s, and it has to do with creating intelligent agents. It's a war game, and it's also political, and frankly, it has to do with overthrowing Saddam Hussein. So that's the plan: a war game about removing Saddam Hussein, and then the political fallout and what's going to happen in Iraq. So they've got a lot of problems, and they fly me out to Lawrence Livermore Labs, and this meeting is held at the Teller cottage, whatever, very nice, secure area. And back in those days, in the 90s, like most computer programmers, I was chain smoking. I was living on nicotine and caffeine. And I listened to their presentation, and I see what they're up to. And I said, can I go outside and have a cigarette? So I go out and I have a smoke, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to tell these people, because what they want to do is never going to happen. And as I'm walking around smoking, there's a security guy, there's an armed guy in combat gear, the whole, well, I mean, you know, Lawrence Livermore, they make bombs there, so it's pretty serious security. And I'm thinking about, what am I going to tell these people? I have my cigarettes, and I go back in and I say to them, everything you've said is all well and good, but there's nothing that you've said that's going to move a unit on a map. And that, to me, is everything that I've done with artificial intelligence and wargaming going back to the 1980s, the early 1980s, maybe in the late 1970s. I'm interested in getting machines to move units on maps. I'm interested in getting computer programs to make intelligent decisions, to look at a battlefield map, to look at NATO 2525B symbols, make plans, make decisions, make tactical and strategic decisions, and then come up with a course of action and move the units on the map. Yesterday, of course, I did a presentation, and I showed, for example, the step-by-step process of the Mate AI, 70 or 80 steps to analyze a battlefield, calculate what its objectives are, and then break down its objectives and its goals, and then start moving units on a map. So to me, that's what AI and wargaming means. It's all about moving units on the map. If it doesn't move units on the map, I'm not interested. You don't have any AI. I don't know what you have, but it's not AI. And this goes back to when I was a kid playing Avalon Hill board war games. And I always was looking for another opponent, you know, growing up in a small town in Wisconsin. I wanted to have someone to play games with, to play war games with. And so I started thinking about, eventually, and by the 70s, we had little personal computers, Apple IIes, and I started messing around with writing AI. What we didn't even call it AI back then, I think, just that could move units on a map. So that's what AI means to me. And I'll turn it back over to Paul.
Any other fellow small town Wisconsin. I was in Waukesha, so it's a shame we didn't we weren't close enough to meet up because I
That
was
was
in
a
the same
theme, so.
position.
Well, well,
A little
and then he moved to Iowa and went to my alma mater. So
Yeah, and I was almost wore a University of Iowa computer science hoodie today, but my wife said, "Don't be disrespectful." So I went, okay.
well, that would have been perfectly fine. Over to you, Paul.
Well, I stayed at Badger and went to Wisconsin.
I was an undergrad at UW. I was.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to analytic war games. So what I'm going to talk to here is a bit different than I think what particularly what Eleanor was talking about, which are kind of more narrative kind of games, which can be used for analytic purposes. But when I think of analytic war games, it's things designed to elicit information that inform analytic exploration of a decision space. A lot of words there, but what these are sort of the when you go like the Naval War College, or you go to a lot of places where in the Pentagon where they're doing wargaming for these analytic reasons. It's to inform decision making about either plans or acquisition community type things. So in those kind of games, I sort of went through first thing, I like I did the other thing. I went to my for $50 a year. I like I've got my Poe thing, so I go and I ask Claude one of the better things. So how can AI enhance analytic wargaming? And it came up with a lot of things that were on my list like the other time I came up with what I thought it was, and then I asked the AI, and I was 80% where they were, and the AI came up with a couple things I hadn't thought about. And that's kind of to me where a lot of these tools are. And this gets to, I think, where Eleanor is talking about as a aid, you can get things about 80% right, but there's 20% that you may miss, and the AI can cue you to that. And then as Eleanor was talking about, as far as the drudge work goes, there's about 80% of it that potentially the AI tools can help you relieve yourself of, but it's not 100. It may only be 60, but there's still a lot of human intervention that has to happen. So I'll kind of go through what I do in game design process, looking at starting with activities, design, execute, collect data, perform analysis. So the first part is the identify the stakeholders, players, define the purpose, sort of those incoming things of why am I doing this game? Who's it for? And one of my hobby horses is this linking within the cycle of research, getting more tight linkage between the M&S and wargaming spokes of that wheel through virtual environments. I failed at selling that in my back in my full-time working days, but I got a chapter in the book Simulation of Wargaming with a colleague of mine. We kind of talked a little bit about it. But to me, there's sort of my dream is getting not just the AI helping execute wargames, but doing it within a virtual environment so that everything is more easily captured. There's some limitations there, but that's if I could pluck my magic twanger and make things work where I'd head. There's some project management assistance AI in this beginning part with establishing objectives, resource constraints, and timelines. I think there's some folks looking at AI tools in different organizations to help with the project management, and we call it, the wedding planning part of wargaming. And I think there's some potential for AI to help with that. Things like establishing a player pool. There's a lot of times you want specific demographic aspects to the player pool. That's really hard to just, go through, LinkedIn or go through things to try to figure. I think there's potentially some AI things you can do that. And I'll call it stakeholder engagement. I don't want to call it doing like an information op on your sponsor. That would probably be bad. But I think there's some sponsor education and management that potentially there's some AI things that can help with that. Then you get to the crafting the scenario and what I call the player decision landscape. What's the story that the players will experience? The players, whether they like to think of themselves as being on a hero's journey within that context, and that they're going to win the war. They're going to save the world. Then there's a decision landscape. There's a whole sort of dramaturgic element to that implies, but there's conflict they have to overcome, or competition they have to overcome within that decision landscape. And as Eleanor and Aaron both talked a little about this idea of that generative AI with text, they can help with that narrative crafting. I played around with Claude. I asked it well, let's write a narrative road to conflict over Taiwan. And it started doing some kind of interesting things. And had one of the things I use Poe, and you pay $50 a year and you get a bunch of tokens, and it does things. And so higher level AIs take more tokens. So you don't want to use all your tokens, but the whole thing is that you can if you expand on each one of these paragraphs, it'll write pages of text about each one of these things. And this was talked about in a couple of hours, you can come up with 100 pages of road to war and background and all sorts of things that aren't terrible. Ed McGrady has researched, he's done a lot of this kind of stuff, looking at even sort of on non-player characters generating narrative participants that can help challenge players. And a lot of these, particularly the AI tools that are trained to assist writers, those things tend to be really good at generating characters and sort of creating a character progression across a story arc. And those kind of things can be important in those kind of narrative games. I'm not so sure for analytic games of the kind we typically do that's as big a thing, but I think that drafting injects like speeches, news reports, social media things, or intel, that there's some room there for that to work. One of the things I found interesting is using generative AI rendering tools to produce graphics and visuals. And Maneuver Warfare, if you look at Maneuver Warfare, it's a game you can buy at the Dietz Foundation, and the designer used AI tools to create the card graphics, and he sort of did that to get a vibe for that particular game that I thought was pretty evocative and interesting. So that it's not just generative AI text, but the AI rendering tools for graphics and visuals, I think, are also an important thing where it can add that immersion to otherwise, my as I put on my thing, my lack of creative white screen kind of stuff, it would potentially help me. Going on, and the design, execution, collect data parts, I think there's a potential. This gets to where we were looking at virtual world things and reinforcement learning algorithms and things, sort of within a game environment, that some of those things, to me, it showed promise. I don't know that anyone's really using it, but in developing and testing both the structures, the game and mechanics, sort of what the players are doing, and exploring the ways the players might use or break them, that some of the reinforcement learning algorithms can sort of, whether it's in your design, pre-play the game for you, or allow you to test things that you think will work, and see if the one thing about AI is it'll do a million different iterations of things, and these reinforcement learning things, and if it can be broken, they will figure out probably a way to break it. There's also potential for them to be used together with traditional M&S. Some of the things I talked about yesterday, where bringing M&S tools and technologists and subject matter experts into the white cell of games to help with that understanding the envelope of outcomes, the distribution of outcomes, and the variable. What's hard is what are the variables that affect where within that outcome the player decisions that have happened before tend to drive where it should be. You don't want to necessarily have, someone taught me early on, things in wargaming are way too important to be left to rolls of the dice sometime. And in analytic wargame in particular, you've got to sometimes drive the players down a certain path to get at the decisions that you're interested in. And if you just allow free play, odd things to happen, it can derail you from where you want to go. And I think AI both has I've got my warning, Will Robinson robot there. The more you get into agentization in particular, you lose control over certain things. And that, as I said, warning, Will Robinson. But game entity research and database population. This has been something I've seen people, this is a road people going down that this is in particular, I think, you got to really be careful of. Now, there's a lot of things you can go out and look at, orders of battle, system performance data, and things that the AI can help you not reduce the time spent doing that, but you still have to vet it. And this idea that, well, I'm going to have my AI agents, scrape the net for all the open source intel about something, and it will somehow, or perish the thought, validated databases of things to populate all the giant databases of huge amounts of data. To me, that's fraught with peril because there's so much bad data out there, and even within classified sources, there's still different organizations that produce data and validate it, have different purposes. And I came out of the acquisition community, and I saw a lot where people who were looking at sort of trying to do gaming designed to represent reality that what happened in acquisition world, things like the variabilities in the environment, and I call them pesky humans, all got held constant. And those are a lot of times the things that were driving the outcomes in real life. So where you were doing comparative analysis for system acquisition, those kind of things, the data used for those aren't always the best things used for real world kind of stuff. The other thing in there is AI agents or generative surrogates for non-player characters. To me, that shows a lot of promise, particularly in Matrix style games. But right now, my playing around with it, again, I've dabbled in it, but they tend to lack a strategic story arc. So when you have them playing each other, sort of trying to do a Matrix game, they just tend to look at the situation as it stands and do something that makes sense based on what the game state is at that point. But I haven't really seen them do sort of a start with a plan and look at that plan going over a story arc, or think of, okay, if I do these arguments in the first 2 turns of the game, that sets me up to be able to do this much more decisive sort of argument based on the success of the 2 things I did before. I think the potential is there, particularly when you have humans playing in the game who are much more reactive. The generative AIs as the non-player characters can add a lot more immersion and depth to the game, but you've got to be careful about hallucinations and the fact that they tend to just be focused on the here and the now. Again, but if you stir the giant machine learning enough, then eventually you'll get something you like coming out of it. So the design and execution, moving to the execution part, beat the dead horse, generative AI to create immersion through, real-time injects, the newsfeed, social media interactions and things. I think that's really useful. Looking at AI agents to support input of player orders across lines of effort. And this is big in a lot of the cast of thousands war games, is you just get so many players all inputting sort of orders from their line of effort, and looking at how those things affect each other. There's been a lot of effort in the tool for orders creation and orders input to the white cell to help organize that information in a way that the white cell has any chance whatsoever. Pete Pellegrino, talks about in some of the games. They could get like 700 or 800 orders and have to try to adjudicate them in like 3 hours. Like, to me, there's some AI that could maybe help you with that. The contextual part and the commander's intent part is hard, but I think it's not unreasonable to try doing some research going down those paths. The danger, Will Robinson part, and this is one of the more popular, is, well, we'll just get the AI to play the game, or we'll get the AI assisted planning and decision making. Well, there's a fine line. You get to human machine teaming is one thing, but when you have the AI playing the game, is it a war game? I come up out of the war games are pesky humans making decisions, and what you won't care about is the pesky humans' reasons for doing what they do. I don't really care unless you're going to have the AI fight the war, as Dr. Sidran said. If you're going to have the AI move the pieces, then I'm interested in sort of what the rationale is. But that's not, to me, that's not a war game in the analytic sense. So if your AI tools tell the player what to do, how often is the human going to say, yeah, no, I think I know more than the AI, I'm not going to do that? So where it comes to me, the human machine teaming part is the AI helping the humans understand variability in the known unknowns and anticipate unknown unknowns impacting the decision, not just telling them what to do. And the other big thing is helping them to decide when to make a decision. How is your plan going? And is it the time now to let it keep going, or have enough things in the design, in the space happen that you have to change your plan? That also gets I showed a little diagram yesterday where it was sort of the space state over time as you went along. And one of the things that shows is, how we talk a lot of times in the Navy in particular about you lose the bubble. You've lost the connection between what you are doing and what you perceive the real world to be and what's actually out in the real world, because you've been playing the game behind and you're now so far time late that your actions are no longer connected to the real world. And I think there's potential for AI tools to help both. I mean, some of these things, this is like real world stuff, not just the war game, but this is applicable to real, when you're actually training people to fight the war, these kind of tools that you don't want them to necessarily say, do this. It's, well, based on what you want to do, here's the things that can prevent you from getting the outcome you want. That's a much harder thing, but I think that's where the effort needs to go. Not getting the AI to play the game in place of the humans, but to get the humans to play a better game and a better informed game. So this gets us to, if we want AI in wargaming helping humans, well, what are the humans doing that they need help with? And I look to Boyd, and there's Charles Sanders Peirce has some interesting ideas about how we reason that there was a Sandia Labs paper that was sort of red pill moment for me when I learning about how, the OODA loop is not a loop. It's a complex adaptive system. And if you look at the methods of sort of what the modes of fallibility are of, going from observe to orient, and in particularly what's happening in the orient, there's a pentagram there for a reason, I joke. There's witchcraft in that orient loop. And a lot of what we tend to do with AI is they want to go directly from observe to decide, and kind of, well, all that orienting stuff, the AI will do that. Well, that's the human centric part of it that's really hard for the AI to do, for reasons of, you look at sort of the world of possibility versus the world, what's the world actually out there, and then what's the world that I perceive. There's a lot of error that can happen in there. And when I tried to kind of put those two things together, I get a really complicated diagram. You can go to this paper, the Sandia paper, and sort of my synthesis of it is, and it's on there. You got to look. It's I have it here, but at the end when I'm talking, I'll put a link to it in. But I was at the CNOSSG back in 2000, 2001, and we went to Sandia Labs, and I met the folks that were writing this paper. And it was, like I said, it was one of those red pill moments where I'm like, wow, there's a lot going on in this, inside our heads, that we don't think about how we think about things. And from a game design point of view, I bring this up in Moore's Wargaming course. It was a little shameless self-promotion for the Moore's Wargaming course, is that as a game designer, when you're putting load, one of the big things that game designers tend to do is they overload the players cognitively with what they expect them to consider. And when you're you have to focus either in this sort of narrative games and strategic level games, focus on the contextualization, interpretation parts. More tactical games tend to focus on the cognitive, moving the tanks around on the board kind of thing. But there's some connective tissue here about the impetus to act and when you make decisions, that if you're forcing the players of the game to consider operating on all these different levels, you better give them a lot of time to synthesize all that, and you better give them a lot of information to do that, or they're just you'll get a denial of service attack against the white cell with RFIs about, well, yeah, but I need to do this to answer the questions you want me to answer. You're not giving me enough information to not just be making it up. And that's where I think there's a potential for AI in the sort of idea of, AI on the fly generating content that a human decides is contextually relevant, think of them sort of as we talk about measle injects, having master serial event lists of things that drive the players to make certain decisions. You sort of could have measle injects on steroids, where the AI can help the white cell understand the relationship between the objectives and analytic questions that are in their decap, what data is being collected, and are those things, are you getting the data you need to answer the questions? Sort of, I have in my head the idea of sort of a red light, yellow light, green light status board of, based on what the players are doing and the data that's getting parsed through by the AI, is, are you getting the information that addresses the different questions or not? I was a lead analyst for when I was assigned over to the Maritime Battle Center in the DC back in the day when they were moving down to Norfolk. Everyone left, so they brought a bunch of us Newick people in to do that before they hired people. But I tried to sort of do that manually for one game, and my idea of a quick look was not, oh, here's what the judgments, here's my analysis report in 2 seconds after the game. It was, the quick look was, here's all the analytic questions, and here's a red light, yellow light, green light about what data we collected, and are you, Mr. Sponsor, going to get the answers to the questions that you want? And if I did it in the middle of the game and said, hey, if there's questions here we're not getting data on, we could re-roll some measles if it's really important to you or not. And I think there's sort of an AI overlord of in an analytic game to help the analysis team and the white cell figure out, are they getting what they need while it's going on. Again, just think more like PTSD back to the experience that I've had, and maybe I'm hallucinating myself what AI might be able to do to all this. And then again, this gets to this data at the back end. Now at the end, the collecting data and performing analysis. So, the data collection, there's been attempts to get at context and structuring and summarizing large data sets. Folks there was a time back at the Naval War College where they were trying to record what everyone was saying and then go back and listen to it after the fact. And it was like, yeah, ain't nobody got time for that. And people are talking to each other, and who's talking to who, and trying to, you can record everything, but good luck trying to figure it all out. And even the players, in hindsight, during the game, will say they did things for one reason, and then afterwards decide the self-rationalization of like, yeah, no, I was really doing this because of this other reason. So there's been efforts. I think Microsoft, or maybe some other, where they had microphones in the ceiling and they would capture the directionality of where people were talking and who was talking to who, and do all this. And it's still to the point where there's so much data that it's hard to make heads or tails out of. But again, speech to text, facial analysis, and all that. But even nonverbal cues, that was addressed. I think Aaron talked about the contextuality of nonverbal cues in a conversation, add a lot of information that's not available just with a text-to-speech conversion. So hard stuff. So that's my thoughts. Like I said, some of it may be PTSD induced from what I've experienced, but it's sort of, I feel that since I went and asked the AI what the AI thought, and I hit a lot of the points, I figure that maybe the AI induced PTSD at least mirrors my own. And with that, I turn it back to Chris.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and grab command for a second, Merle, and put this up. Is that the link for the paper, Paul? Paul?
Link for the paper is, let me find it again.
No, is that that I just put up on the screen? Is that it? Singlub, Harris, and Rayburn?
No. Oh, wait. Yes, that's it.
That's it. Okay. All right.
That's it.
Just wanted to confirm that. So,
That is it.
So I was tempted to just sort of come back on and say, that's it, everybody. We've got everything we need. There's nothing I've got to add. But I won't do that. I will say that it's not really Connections Online unless a cat makes an appearance at some point or another. So that was nice. Usually it's in the past it's been my cat, but I don't have a cat anymore, and so it was nice to see a cat show up. I'm going to offer a few thoughts of my own on this, and some of this is sort of like I realized in going back and looking at it that a lot of it is my journey about how I've thought through the issues that I have with using AI in gaming. And most of the thoughts that you've heard that I'm going to sort of try to pull together are things that other people have said in some way, shape, or form, but I'm going to try to synthesize my own thinking on this. The first is that gaming is essentially about human decision-making. So that's why, from a professional analytical standpoint, we do wargaming. From like an educational standpoint, it's about the humans learning something. And so For hobby gaming, having the idea of an AI opponent so that the human has somebody to play against, that's one thing or another. But I was initially extremely skeptical about AI using large language models or whatever flavor of AI of the week you wanted to use them in war games, because it seemed to me that there was a lot of non-war gamers, people who were AI experts but weren't necessarily wargaming experts, who said, I can program an AI to be red, or I can program an AI to be blue, etc. At which point I said, okay, we've got a word for that. It's called modeling and simulation. Technically 3 words. But the thing about that, and I don't mean that pejoratively by any stretch of the imagination, but what I do mean is you're talking to the wrong guy, right? I'm not a modeling and sim guy, right? That's a different tool that a different group of people use. I talk to those people. I am not the person that you would come to if you wanted to implement modeling and sim type solutions. They're not the people that you would go to if you wanted to implement a wargaming type solution, a human wargaming type solution. So you're talking to the wrong people if you're talking in those terms. And so that's the piece of advice I would have for the people that are strictly AI people that are coming along here. You're talking to the wrong people. So going back and thinking about this, so I had my opinion about some of this stuff change because I had a conversation with one of my colleagues at my current employer, who gave me a bunch of use cases that I had not thought about. So I went back and started thinking about this a little bit more. And one of the places I went is I started thinking about the places where the use cases for autonomy. Now, autonomy and AI are not the same thing. There's a lot of overlap there. But whenever you hear about autonomy, whenever you hear about robots, whenever you hear about things like that, what are the 3 words that you always hear as to why you might want to do something like that? Dangerous, dirty, and dull, right? Now, dangerous, dirty, and dull, the first thing about that is dangerous to who? Not to the robot, right? We don't care what happens to the robot. It's dangerous to the human being. So that sort of emphasizes that previous point I was making about it being about the human beings. Do these things apply to something like using a large language model for a game or using AI for a game? Well, games generally aren't dangerous, at least not in those sense. You don't have to worry. When we talk about a game blowing up in your face, it's entirely metaphorical. They're generally not dirty. You may have to roll up your sleeves and sort of, get to work on it, but it's not like it's a dirty thing. But they can be dull. And by that, I mean, frequently, there's a lot of stuff you have to do in order to sort of grind your way through to prepare for the game. Or after the game, there's a lot of grinding stuff you have to do. I'll get back to that in just a moment. I think, though, that when I sort of take another step back and look at it, it seems to me that one of the places where these sorts of tools potentially have a lot to offer is when you're under severe time constraints and as a force multiplier. So one person can do more with some AI assistance than one person could do without it. And they can do it generally faster. If you can't do more and you can't do it faster or better, then you probably shouldn't be looking at the tool. And the tools are changing a lot, and the tools are not all the same. So it'll take a little bit of effort to figure out whether it meets that criteria or not. So when could you use this stuff? What can it be used for? So you could use it before the game to actually help you set up the game. Now, David Burden, who attended some of the earlier lectures in the audience, he did a really, really nice presentation recently about using AI to do matrix games. And he talked about using AI to set up the game, do the road to war, things like that, and then also about using it in the game. I recommend that presentation to everybody. It showed up on the PackSims website within the last couple of days, and it's an excellent presentation. I suggest people go look at it. Helping set up the game so you can use it to do roads of war. You could use it to pull together a bunch of information from a wide variety of sources, et cetera, et cetera. So that seems to be fairly self-explanatory to me. You can also use it to take the output of one game and turn it into the input for another game. One of my colleagues said that he's had some success. It's not perfect, but he's had some success taking the output of Command Professional Edition and turning it into something that he could use as an input file for AFSIM, which is a modeling and sim tool. So taking an output from a war game and doing at least the first draft of what you would then feed into your modeling and sim program if you want to dive deeper into the particulars of what happened in the war game. And that struck me as being a fantastic idea. He said it's not perfect. It's not just ready for prime time, but setting up an AFSIM file is one of those really, really long and dull tasks, and this worked very well for that. During the game, it seems to me that a large language model can be used for things like injects, to help with adjudication, as a tactical decision aid for the players. Think in terms of emulating a staff. I know that as a war game designer in Newport, a lot of times we were kind of limited in what we could have the players do, because we knew that it's two guys trying to replicate an entire organization full of people. And so you've got some limitations there. So I think it's worth taking a good hard look about, okay, what can I do now in this situation? Because I can emulate having a lot more people, but I can still have it be about the decisions. I mean, wouldn't it be great if the players are playing the commanders, but they can still do some production because they've got a virtual staff that'll do it for them? You don't want to overwhelm the analysts, though. And that's the third part of this, is that afterwards helping with the analysis. And so helping in what ways? And when I sort of look at this, what I see as sort of a first approximation, and I should emphasize, I have not yet fully processed everything that Eleanor said and everything that Aaron has said about this. I need to go back and rewatch this presentation and sort of cogitate on what they had to say in particular. Because, especially what Eleanor's doing, she's doing something that I literally hadn't thought in those terms before, and I need to go back and think about it a little bit more. But when I hear the descriptions about the sort of things that LLMs can do, what I hear is sort of the same kind of conversation that I would have heard in the 1980s when people would ask the question, so this word processor thing, is that useful? Or, hey, there's this thing called a spreadsheet and I have no idea what it does. What can I use it for? I've heard people say that what they use LLMs for is to say things like, organize this data for me. And I know that as an analyst, a lot of times you spend a lot of time just trying to figure out what the data looks like. I mean, when I used to do exercise reconstructions at the Center for Naval Analysis, the first 3 days of the reconstruction was just cleaning the data, going through everything and finding the places where they transpose the two digits. Because chances are that the surface ship did not go to 600 knots for 15 minutes. It probably just transposed two of the digits, and it was poking along at 10 knots the entire time, right? And I love submariners, but there's one thing you can't get all submariners to do. They will follow the directions with one exception. If you tell them to report in local time, half of them will report in Zulu time, Greenwich Mean Time. The other half will report in local, and then you have to go through all the data, and you can dump some of it into Excel, but you still have to go through all the data. And going through that data is frequently I'm going to go into Word and I'm going to do this operation in Word, and then I'm going to save it as a CSV and import it into Excel, and then I'm going to add this column here so I can put in a tab delimiter for a field delimiter, and then I'm going to go back into Word, and you spend all your time going back and forth, and next thing you know, 3 days have gone by. I would kill for the opportunity to say, hey, clean the data. Large language, Chat GPT, clean the data for me, right? For something like that. So I can see why this could be a very, very useful tool in admittedly the same sort of way it would be useful for non-wargaming activities, but it can really I could see it as something that could speed up wargaming activities. So a few lessons that I take away while cogitating about this. One is that AI should be something that you use to make the human participation better. And the human may be you, the analyst, it may be you, the designer, it may be the players, etc. But if wargaming is about human decision making and is about the humans, then the use of the AI should be to make the human part better. Get better data, get more in-depth data, spend less time fiddling with the data to prepare it for an analysis, and get those extra 3 days actually doing analysis. Those things strike me as being the sorts of things that are useful. The other thing is I think we need to really sort of sit back and think long and hard about what we lose. Erin mentioned Una Wong, and here's my Una comment, because I talked with her about this. At one point, she was going to be on this panel, but we weren't able to make it happen. And when I said, hey, Una, you could use it for things like creating, for the dull task of like creating injects and stuff like that. And she said to me, there's another word for those dull tasks like creating injects. And that there's another phrase to describe that. And that phrase is mentoring opportunity. So that's the thing that you do when you have new people that want to be war gamers, is you give them some instruction and you throw them at the tasks that you don't want to do because you're busy doing something else. And then you come back and you go over it with them and sort of say, okay, this has, this particular inject has these really good attributes, but here's where it falls short. And here's what you need to do. And here's why you need to do it, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I am intensely skeptical of situations where people want to do a particular process or procedure because of the side effect that you get from it, right? I've had people tell me that they were against automating any of the data cleaning processes, et cetera, because by doing all the stuff manually, you get a much better understanding of the data. To which my response is, maybe we should come up with a better way to understand the data rather than rely on this side effect from an otherwise difficult process that could be improved. And so maybe the solution here is, it's a good mentoring opportunity to have people do injects, but we need to be cognizant of the fact that we're losing something, but that doesn't mean that we automatically should not adopt the new technology. It means that we should think about what we're losing and come up with a way to not lose it. Maybe we can come up with a better way to do that mentoring training opportunity than just sort of the side effect of what we were doing before. So let's see if there's anything else that I wrote on this. No, I think that's pretty much it. Other than I will say, once again, I really like David Burden's presentation, and I think everybody should go look at it. So everybody, why don't you turn your cameras back on, and we'll come back on and see if there's any questions, comments, concerns. There's one question that I think is really good. Let me throw it up here. If AI is programmed with data set that is based on the past, but you are trying to game with black swan events, how would AI help with that? If I'm going to go ahead and start off on that, I'm skeptical when people start talking about how do you predict black swan events, because I think if you can predict it, it's not a black swan event.
Yeah, that's like a defining element of what makes a black swan is that's unanticipated. But yet we try to retroactively say we should have been able to predict it. But I do think there is potential, though, for AI to, because this is like when the bug becomes a feature, because a lot of times AI, really like generative AI kind of things, aren't context sensitive. An AI hallucination can sort of be a black swan occasionally, and I've seen that happen. But again, it's like the aha moment where humans, you can't necessarily plan to make the AI do it. It's sort of serendipity when it happens over.
But what if people really did have 6 fingers on each hand?
Well, I'm thinking more in terms of what was described, where people had tried to buy Greenland before people thought of buying Greenland. People might sort of think that. Well, I don't particularly think that's a black swan, but that's kind of evocative of the kind of stuff that happens in games, and particularly with Matrix style games, where people are arguing things sometimes to argue. And I can see where if you have generative AI assisting people or non-player characters generating semi-random activities, that you sort of get a black swanish thing every so often.
Yeah, and I can add one more thing. I think you can like train the game on what kind of game you want it to be. So we don't have this feature available yet, but like for our platform, if you want it to be more like inventive and more creative, you'll be able to turn that on. Like if you're creating a game on like ChatGPT and gaming out potential futures, like for games that I know that are run, often people have ChatGPT up. In the future, people are going to have like AI LLMs up and going through what are options. You'll put in, I even do this when I'm doing research sometimes. I say, okay, these are great. Now give me 5 crazy options, and so I can think through that. And you can train the AI to incorporate those black swan events so you are more prepared. And so actually I think like that's one thing like this democratization of war games is going to push us to be able to do. Using LLMs is going to push us to be able to do, because it'll give you ideas and then you'll be like, oh, I didn't think about that. And then you can either stay on that or like it'll push you to be a little bit more creative. It's kind of just all in the prompts, which means it's still back in like the war gamers' hands. Our utility doesn't go away. In fact, it increases because we have that knowledge and it's needed in order to develop the information environment in a successful way where, like, as a lot of y'all have mentioned, can actually produce analytical outcomes or positive training experiences.
Aaron, you look like you're going to say something.
So I'll follow on here with an example, a real world example of work I did long ago. Where it was, by today's standards, we would call it AI, but it was not data driven. And I think one of the problems is that we talk a lot about sort of AI as if it's all data driven, but much of AI is not. It's rules based or other types of inputs. But years ago, I was building simulation models of whether or not there would be a Shia revival. This was the, right, the Ali Nasser, right, invasion of Iraq and so on. And we were asked about, sort of, is this possible? We did a whole lot of simulations using inputs derived from real world intel analysts on what they sort of saw as the major identities and how they would, potentially interact. And we ended up running a lot of simulations and we said, nah, nationalism was not going to go away, even when sectarian identities remained, were perhaps becoming more salient. But we kept seeing in our simulations these notions of sort of positive themes could have transnational reverberations, maybe human rights or pro-democracy or economics, rights or whatever. And they could bind groups together so you could not get anything that was exclusive, right? You couldn't get a strong, Shia identity or anti-Sunni identity to really carry very far. It would be, stamped out. But something that was pro-democracy that lots of groups could latch onto. And at the time, we were like, okay, no Shia revival. This other kind of stuff indicates something. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but effectively, our simulation stumbled into the basic outlines of what will become the Arab Spring. We didn't know it. Right? And so part of the black swan is we probably see indications of these things all the time. We just don't recognize them because they live outside of our existing mental models. And I think that so part of it, when we talk about like surprise, it's surprising to whom? It's that whole notion is driven by what are our priors and what are the sort of active parts of where our attention is and the limits of our imagination. But we see the pieces of these things, I think, very much. And, and you can go all the way back. I mean, these are the problems of induction. We think that the future will be like the past. And so there's sort of lots of key pieces here. But I think that AI can be very helpful at searching the space of possibilities. And how do we harness that? And some of that is driven by the data. Some of that is getting beyond the data. And there's a whole lot of stuff in sort of science about, strategic interaction, anticipation, and, and a whole lot of stuff that will sort of bind right. Today's data has built in like the world structures. But if you look at like Lucas critique and like economics, right, just threatening to make a policy change, people start to change their behavior. And so you can't really use, a macroeconomic model just to sort of change a policy and see what happens, because people's behavior is going to change underneath the hood and so on. That's why we talk about like model creep or other kind of things that happen naturally. So again, I think that there's a lot that's available out there. And I think it really is, how do we use computation, we'll call it AI, to really help us better search the space of what's possible.
And that's where I think, oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, I think that black swan is a concept that shares with say, Moore's law, the idea that it's a description of what we've observed as opposed to some like, rule of nature or something like that.
Yeah, well, to me, it tends to come from that, violating the, that my little Persian cognition thing of when something that your belief system is bounded, and when activities or events or data that's outside the bounds of that start playing and impacting on that, that's when the black swanny things happen. And where large language models, generative AI tends to work from large databases of things and finding, it's very sort of inductive, deductive. To me, as we go complementing that with agentization, where rules-based systems that aren't derived from known data, that they start acting, and there's the potential for complex adaptive systemy things. That's where either novel behaviors, black swans, things that are new can potentially arise because they're not bounded by the training data set that they've to me, there's a complementarity there that we'll get to eventually, but I don't know what that is.
It's an exciting time to be a wargamer. So, okay, let's see. I'm not seeing any other questions. So, anybody have any final thoughts they want to share? So, Dr. Sidran, if you've got something, you're muted.
Oh, you guys are working in a different space than I am, and you're doing war games to train officers and to play what-if simulations and that sort of thing. For a number of reasons, I'm more on the M&S side, modeling and simulations, and I'm very much from the commercial off-the-shelf wargaming area. I've written a number of commercial war games, and so that's a different set of expectations. I have done a lot of work for like the U.S. Army. I've worked, for example, let's say like on the OneSAF project, trying to make the front end usable. So I know what you're up against. But basically, what the area that I work in is creating war game engines. Almost every war game I've ever done actually has 4 standalone programs. It's got a program that allows the user to create order of battle tables by just clicking and dragging icons. There's another program that allows it to create 3-dimensional maps. And then there's another program that allows you to take your order of battle tables and place them on a 3-dimensional map, creating a scenario. And then there's a 4th program which takes these files and then plays a war game and against a person in America, another person in England, or person in America versus the AI. And so that's the type of program that I have to build and that I do build because that's where my business is. You know, when I do a war game, you know, like one of my war games was at the time was the #1 seller. It sold 128,000 copies in 1988. So that's my market, whereas you guys are working on war games that sell one copy. You know. So my needs are to create an AI that will be an opponent. And I don't think you guys need an AI that does that. I don't think you guys want an AI that does that. I think you guys want to create what Sid Meier, a computer game programmer, he called a game a series of interesting decisions. And so you want to create a game which allows the users to make a series of interesting decisions and then analyze them.
Well, I do see that having an AI player, again, I tried to get at that notion of having an AI that helps you sort of play test your game.
Yeah.
And I think in our kind of games that having much better play tester AIs would help a lot to help to you know, as I said, some things are way too important in the game to be left to the role of the die or an AI. You know, understanding that landscape better through watching AI play the different sides, I think would be really helpful.
I mean, the one thing I discovered, or that we discovered, when I was a principal investigator for DARPA, was that no combat commander wants an AI tool. The end. The end. They do not want a piece of software, even if it can, you know, be on their iPhone and say, this is a bad move. You really need to reconsider this. They don't want to hear it. They want to make their bad decision in the field all by themselves. And that's what DARPA found out. And that's when they basically shut down all those programs. There was no need, as far as DARPA was concerned, or the U.S. Army is concerned, or the Office of Naval Research, or the Marines were concerned, to create a software program that would be some sort of digital assistant to a combat commander. We tried all kinds of different names. We called it, you know, digital assistants. We called it, oh, by the way, that was one title for a DARPA project. Oh, by the way, did you forget this? You know, they just don't want to know. That's what we learned, is that the commanders in the field don't want to be second guessed by any AI.
Well, and that goes back to a project I did where we were working on, you know, we called them tactical decision aids back then, but basically they were big spreadsheet things. And the one in particular I was dealing with was for mine countermeasures and figuring out, you know, well, how well did you sweep or do mine countermeasures in an area? And when we said, well, there's so much variability. If you go through the big cookbook thing they had and you look at each of the inputs, and you put the variability in, you ended up where there was, when you got to the end, it was, you know, everything was 0 to 1. And they didn't want to know that they didn't know. They wanted a number and be able to say there was a validated process that got them to the number, even if they knew it was bullshit.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to things like decision aids and stuff like that, I wonder how much that changes over time, because I remember that there was a saying, I remember with regard to the United States Navy, which I spent the bulk of my career working with or for the US Navy. And the saying was something along the lines of, if somebody has a good idea, you have to wait for everybody who was a lieutenant commander or senior to retire before you could actually implement the good idea.
Yeah.
And I was reading something. This was actually Paul yesterday put up a graphic of the 4 different kinds of war games: Centaur, Minotaur, etc., that from a Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists article. And I tracked it down and read it this morning. And that article was based upon survey data that a lieutenant colonel in the Army at the Army War College did based upon surveys of Army War College and Naval War College students. And it was their attitude towards AI as a decision aid, et cetera, et cetera. It was both their trust and whether we should do it or not, which turned out to be two totally different things. Those numbers were way less correlated than you might think they should be. Because there was lots of people saying, yeah, I don't trust it, but we totally need to be doing this. And I think that, I can come up with a lot of explanations as to why you might do that, which is we're going to go there eventually, so we need to be working in that direction. But what we've got so far ain't cutting the mustard. I can see that. And he broke it down by how senior you were also. And that's consistent with what I've seen. Frequently when I was at the Naval War College, you could have a conversation with a lieutenant or a lieutenant commander and they go, oh yeah, no problem. You totally get that. Makes total sense to me, et cetera, et cetera. The captains would fight you to the death. The 06s would fight you to the death on stuff. They would, in some cases, they would fight even after you mathematically proved it to them by having them go through the exercise themselves, and the results matched what you told them was going to happen, and they would still fight it. It was a prisoner's dilemma, sort of, not prisoner's dilemma, Monty Hall problem sort of situation. And so I can easily see both that's what would be going on now, and also that it might change over time.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. I was at an Army Strategist Association event a few weeks ago in DC, a Strategist Association event in DC a few weeks ago. And it was a presentation on AI and, AI, just generally speaking, entering the military. And so many questions were asked about how can I get the higher ups to listen to us. As I've seen in the comments, people are using AI. Our adversaries are using AI. We need to be using AI. I completely agree with what I think Aaron said about like those small tasks that AI now does. Mentors or like, not mentees or, lower level in the totem pole should be doing. Like that is a problem. Like there's going to be a knowledge gap that is going to be developed because of the use of AI. I think that's something that's not really being addressed right now. It's something that personally worries me. I wonder how like my college experience would have been if instead of like my last 2 years I had AI, or my last year, this is definitely aging me, or I had AI the entire time, differently. But I think we, this discussion about, people are hesitating. I don't think they're going to be hesitating much longer, and I don't think they can hesitate much longer, especially with what we're seeing with like this current administration and what, in my opinion, with future administrations, like the integration with technology is happening faster, and like people are pushing forward and through that. And I think people are going to get left behind if they don't. So that's just my 2 pieces I'll add there.
That totally makes sense to me. I've often thought that the U.S. military, when you get to questions like, will the U.S. military allow the AI to make the decision to pull the trigger? My thought has always been, we're going to be very reluctant to do that until somebody else does, and then we're going to do it. So, let's see.
But just to add, right now I'm working on a project that actually is gaming out what happens. Like what happens if that happens and our adversaries are doing that for like the US government and like nonprofits. I'm working on a project. So people are already thinking about what you're discussing right now. Like this is not that movie Wargames from like the 1980s or whatever. Like there's always going to be a human in the loop, or not always, but generally speaking, going to be a human in the loop. And I think like what we need to be working towards is AI, or like humans using AI constantly, human assisted AI or AI assisted human decision making.
All right, I'm going to throw something up real quick. My favorite general officer quote, unattributed. I hear what you are saying and believe you are right, but I can't make decisions based on that unless I can connect it to my own experience. I think that's a fantastic quote. And I think what ends up happening is over time, as more and more officers get to the point where AI is part of their general experience, their own experience, that they will trust it more and more, assuming it proves to be trustworthy. I mean, there's two issues, right? Should you trust it? and do you trust it aren't necessarily the same thing, right? Hopefully they'll all end up in the same place eventually.
I want to offer a perspective here, which is a little bit different. I don't think that this is actually an AI problem. This is a decision-making problem. If you go back and look at the history of, I'll just use my background, Intel community, producer, consumer relations, etc. Decision makers have largely been hostile to the existence of an independent assessment that basically commands and warns them that they're headed towards failure. They reject information that they don't want. Montgomery rejected all of the intelligence, because he didn't task it. It came from an outside body. Had he used his resources to collect it, because he would have already decided that it matters, right? So, we choose where to point the flashlight. He might have used it instead. He might have believed it, but it came from an outside source. Roger Hillsman work on policy critic and the idea that, right, that intelligence giving warning to a policymaker is effectively critical of them because it says either they failed to account for something or that they believe that it was taken care of and it's not. In either case, it is implicitly critical of them. And so I think that AI is just another voice in this longer chain of independent sources of information that people have to contend with. So these are, I think, to me, I look at it in that sense that it's not the AI computer part, it's that it's an independent source that is now trying to penetrate and command somebody's attention in a way that they don't want to have their attention diverted. So I think that is, to me, is where we have a much longer history of this. And I expect that, we're working in that same path here.
Yeah, and that's I put a thing in. There was an article I saw. There's some other things that have been relating use of AI with cognitive decline. And my question is that a thing, or is it abuse of AI or misuse? Is it that we don't really know how to use it right yet to improve our cognitive ability? We're relying on it as a crutch to get away from having to do cognitive activity. And this relates to, I put another thing in that, I'm sure Chris and there's getting a senior officer to make a decision that's in any way controversial can be like pulling teeth. And they're always like, oh, I wish I had an AI that would tell me what to do. It's like the fact that you're in a position that's ambiguous, the AI is not going to be able to create information that's not out in the world to tell it what to do. You are in a time constrained, information scarcity based situation that you have to. That is the line of work you've chosen, sir. The AI is not going to help with that.
There's also, I don't know how true this is now, but this is the story that was too many landlines going off. This is a story that was told to me by a friend of mine who at the time was a colonel, and also he also had a doctorate in computer science, and we were good friends. And he went to a meeting. This was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it was about AI and it was about the military. It was about the Army. And I asked him what happened at the meeting. He said, "Oh, they want like 2 or 3 gallons of AI." They just had no idea what AI was or what they wanted to do, and that's how he described it. They just said, "Give me 2 or 3 gallons of AI," And I wonder if that's still true. I wonder if the armed services just look at AI and really don't understand what it does and what it doesn't do, but they know they're supposed to have like 2 or 3 gallons of it.
I've had people tell me they want 2 or 3 gallons of wargaming.
Yeah, maybe it's the same kind of philosophy.
So, All right. I don't think we have any other questions. I don't see any other questions. And we're at about the 2-hour mark. We're close to the 2-hour mark. And it does not surprise me that this topic took us a full 2 hours to solve, but it's solved now. We can all move on, right, to new and better things. I'd like to thank you all for being part of this. This was an excellent panel. I really enjoyed being part of this panel. I hope everybody in the audience enjoyed it as much as I did. And Merle is going to take us out. And thank you very much for participating. And Connections Online 2025 continues. Merle, hit it.